The Jesus Trilogy, Book 2, Then There Were Two, Chapter 13. The sea was more rough than usual. The pitch and yaw of the vessel was so severe that the water lapped over the gunwales at times. In the distance, the schooner with a high white sail raced along at what appeared to be a very rapid pace. There was the ever-present sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. Even in the calmest sea, he was getting seasick. He often wondered why he didn't get sick in the bathtub. His mother had been the same way. John, grab that reel before it goes overboard. John dutifully grabbed the reel and put it back in the case. The boat, a 40-footer, was holding up well in the severe chop. They were nearly to the far edge of their nets now. James, lower that sail. I think we're almost there. We'll capsize. If we do, you won't be able to steer in this wind. Let me be the judge of that. Now lower the sails, he said sternly. All right already, but remember you can't swim. I'm not sure John or I could either in this chop. Another 6-foot wave slammed into the bow, lifting the boat up out of the water. Peter's hands lost grip of the wheel, and he slipped down on the hardwood floor, hitting his head on the edge of the boat rail. He was dazed. You all right, Pete? John yelled. Peter shook his head vigorously and stammered, yes. He got up off the floor of the deck and saw that the sail was not completely down. Get that thing down now, Peter yelled. James eased the sail down the rest of the way. Miraculously, Peter was able to keep the boat lined up perpendicular to the high waves, so the waves kept hitting the bow. He didn't keep the boat aligned just so it might easily capsize. See the buoy? Peter yelled to John, standing near the bow on the port side. Nah. Oh, yeah, I see it. Get the bar and hook it. John swiftly grabbed the bar and hooked the buoy just as the boat passed by it. If he had not gotten it, they would have to make another pass. The sun was low and there might not be time. John and James heaved and started to draw the net into the boat. It was several 100 feet long, and James and John started to pull fish in, throwing them into the bottom of the boat. How's it look, Jimmy? Peter asked. Good, very good, James yelled back. Better be, Peter said. What'd that Judas boy say about the deal? Sounded great to him. What if he can't deliver? What do you mean? Peter said. James and John were now feverishly at work drawing in more net and throwing more fish into the ship's hold. What if he can't pay? John said. Yeah, maybe we should deal directly with his head man, James added. I don't know who. The boat suddenly hit something very hard. It yawed 45 degrees to the right and nearly went over on its side. Eventually the keel caught and it rolled back to port. Finally it leveled, and by some miracle it was still headed into the waves. John had been flung overboard, but had caught his hand in the net. James began to pull him back into the boat. Unfortunately, about half of their catch had been flung overboard as well. The fish were happy, but the fishermen were not. Pete, you okay? Peter was back up on his feet at the wheel of the boat, but he was not okay. Still nauseated, now having sustained his second concussion inside of 5 minutes, he leaned his now dizzy head into the hold and fed the fish with languishing air. The retching seemed to go on forever, but finally it did stop, and he straightened. Pete, you okay? James repeated. No, what on earth was that? Must have been a shark or a rock or something. A long way from shore. Just don't hit it again, whatever it was. No sooner had the words escaped his lips than the boat yawed hard to starboard again. James and John were flung 12 feet across to the starboard rail. John hit the rail first, and then James slammed into him. They both heard something crack. James screamed in pain, clutching his right ankle. They both looked down and saw the ankle was bent 90 degrees to the side. James kept screaming in pain. John quickly got up and laid him out flat on the deck. His twin brother had now passed out from that pain. Pete, James is hurt. What happened, John? Peter yelled back. I think he broke his leg and now he's out cold. Is he breathing? I don't know. Check his pulse. John did so. It was there. It was faint, but slow and regular, and then he saw it. Sticking out of James' ankle was a jagged spike of bone at least 3 inches long. Now John's stomach became queasy. "How is it?" Peter yelled back. "Okay." John leaned over the side of the hold and fed the fish himself. The hold was still 1/3 full, and the flipping and flopping to consume the human buffet lasted a few minutes. "John!" "Yeah," John said weakly. "Hurry and get the fish in. Let's get out of here while we can." "Okay." "Did you see it?" "See what?" John said as he began feverishly pulling in more net and more fish. "What'd we hit?" "No, Pete." He couldn't believe the amount of fish he was getting. His arms began to ache, but he kept pulling. Soon the hold was full, and there were still more fish. "Pete, the hold's full. What'll I do?" "Chop off the net and throw the rest back." John still had 50 feet of net to go. He kept some of the nice ones he could get his hands on and threw the rest back. Finally done, he sat exhausted against the gunwale, sweating profusely and breathing rapidly. Just then Peter looked his way and saw a huge dark object just behind John in the water. It was a deep gray color with white spots, each haloed with a white ring. "A water giraffe," Peter said aloud, shaking his head. "Must be the concussion," he said under his breath, but then he saw the object again. Its body arched clear out of the water and then slid back in again. "Hold on, Johnny," Peter screamed, but Johnny again was thrown overboard. Both his arms caught in the twisted net, and he felt himself being pulled along in the water. "Has to be a whale," Johnny cried, but it couldn't be a whale. This was a landlocked lake. The biggest fish in Galilee was a sturgeon. His father Zebedee had caught the record 250-pound sturgeon fish many years ago. Just then John's body, along with the net, was thrown clear of the water, some 20 feet in the air. He and the net were then pulled back down under the water. John thought he would never surface again, but he finally did. This scenario was repeated several more times. John could see the boat. He was still close enough. If he could free himself from the net, he could swim for it and probably make it back to the boat. Tried reaching for his knife, but couldn't get either hand close to his waist. This thing, whatever it was pulling him along across the water at 15 knots or better. He saw the arching body each time he came up out of the water, but by now his lungs were beginning to fill up with water. It was getting difficult to breathe. Suddenly a huge head reared up in front of him. It was attached to a long, slender neck. The creature had massive black eyes and a huge mouth which filled up with dagger-like teeth. The massive head lunged for him. John let out a scream, but was so frightened it was silent. He took what he knew would be his last breath and closed his eyes. Suddenly he felt himself shoot up in the air. He was flying. He kept his eyes shut. He knew this was the end. Just as suddenly he hit what he felt was mush. It stopped moving abruptly. Immediately he felt sharp pains all over his body. He opened his eyes and found himself staring into the face of a live tuna, along with 100 other fish. He took a breath, but realized all he inhaled was fish smell and no air. Panic set in immediately. He began to flail, but he couldn't tell which way was up. As he kept flailing, he tried to yell, but still couldn't get any air. He kept on flailing and suddenly heard a voice. "John! John!" It was Peter's unmistakably piercing voice. Peter was called a loudmouth for a reason. John was never more glad to hear it. The fish started biting him harder, but the pain was now secondary. He just needed air. Suddenly he felt a sharp jab on his left calf. He then felt it a second time and instinctively grabbed for it. His aching hand slipped off it. He grabbed again, but it wasn't there. Now more panic took over. Things started to spin. He began to hallucinate and lost the contents of his bladder. He presently saw a shimmering golden stream. It was smooth as glass, and there was a gorgeous blonde being clothed in a white sequined low-cut gown, standing on a glassy surface. Her hand was outstretched toward him, and her lips were mouthing the words, "Come." But no sound came from them. On the other side of the stream was a golden walkway. It coursed through a gate of fiery opal, centered in a massive pearl at least 300 feet in diameter. The gate was partially open, and behind it the light blinded him. He turned his head back to the blonde and took a step forward and then another. He looked down just for an instant at the sandy shore. It was composed of myriads of tiny, shimmering diamonds. As he began to take another step, he saw the blonde waving her right index finger, and then he heard the voice. Too late, John. Come again next time, John. John, breathe. Come on, man, breathe. John suddenly felt a sharp pain in the center of his chest. He let out a blood-curdling scream, or so he thought, but Peter never heard it. He hit John's chest again, and John let out a yell that Peter did hear. Thank goodness you're alive, Peter sank back. Somehow he had looped John's arm with a notched spear and pulled him up out of the fish pile in the hold. His breathing was shallow and his arm was bleeding profusely, but John was now alive. John's blood pressure began to drop and the bleeding from the deep wound on his arm slowed. Peter and John now sat staring at one another, unable to move. As John's vascular system began to respond, the epinephrine was released into his bloodstream. The bleeding began to increase. Somehow James had pulled himself over the gunwale and began fashioning a tourniquet to John's left arm. The wound was close to his shoulder, but somehow James had pulled himself over from the gunwale and somehow got the cloth above it, and the bleeding slowed to a slight ooze as he tightened the tourniquet. Did you guys see that? Peter and John nodded. Both were still too weak to make audible sounds. The sun was on the horizon now, and the sea had calmed considerably. It was massive. Did you see the spots in that vicious head? Amazing. Yeah, I saw it, bro, up close and personal, John finally mustered. What on earth was it? Peter now asked. A sea serpent, James said confidently. It had a massive head and a long, undulating body. The head was wider than the body. Must have been 200 feet long. What's this boat? 40. Yeah, maybe even 250 feet. Unbelievable, the extremely weakened John muttered. Yeah, we all saw it, but no one else did. They won't believe us. Peter lamented, even though he knew the three could not keep this event a secret.